Welcome to Whispers and Footsteps, where shadows speak and silence holds secrets. I'm glad you've stepped into our world of mystery, eerie tales, and the unknown. Before we dive into tonight, Sherlock Holmes and the Night Whistler. Chapter 1. The Silence at Reed's Theatre. It was on a damp April evening that Sherlock Holmes and I were summoned to Reed's Theatre, a modest establishment tucked away on the eastern edge of Soho. The rain had begun not long after twilight, turning the narrow lanes slick and glistening under the sputtering gas lamps. I recall the weather because Holmes, who usually paid it no heed, commented as we stepped from our cab, "Walter Watson is the great confessor of pavements. Let us see what secrets it has encouraged tonight." The theatre stood mute and unwelcoming, its heavy red curtains drawn shut, and the usual crowd of smokers and loafers conspicuously absent. A single constable stood at the entrance, nodding us through with wordless urgency. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of varnish, damp velvet, and something else, an absence. It was the peculiar stillness of a space built for noise and now robbed of it. Inspector James Denham met us in the lobby. A practical man with sandy hair and a sharp brow, he had never been one for ceremony, but tonight even he looked unsettled. "Holmes," he said curtly. "Thank God it's Lansing, Victor Lansing, found dead in the orchestra pit. No sign of injury, no blood, no struggle, just gone." Holmes's eyes sharpened instantly. "Victor Lansing?" "The violinist." "The same." "And no sign of how?" "None. You'll want to see it for yourself." He led us past rows of faded seats to the front of the theatre. There, in the orchestra pit, under the dull glow of a house lantern, lay the body of Victor Lansing. His face bore no expression of pain, only a curious slackness, as though death had come not with violence, but with a gentle hush. He was dressed immaculately in black tails, his collar slightly askew. Beside him lay his violin, shattered into 3 pieces. Holmes descended into the pit silently. He did not speak for several minutes. He crouched low, inspecting the violin pieces, Lansing's hands, the narrow planks of the pit flooring. Then he looked up. "Watson, if you would." I joined him, crouching beside the corpse. "No bruising," I said. "No swelling. Pupils slightly dilated, pulse absent, of course. No external sign of trauma. The body is still warm. Death occurred within the last 2 hours." Holmes nodded, then turned to Denham. "Who discovered him?" "Cora Lansing, his sister. She assists him at rehearsals. She said he'd sent everyone away after their final run-through, wanted to practice alone. She returned a little past 10 and found him like this. No one else has been here since." "No other doors to this pit?" "None. Just the steps you see there, locked from within when the theatre's closed. The front doors were also bolted. Cora had her own key." Holmes straightened. "Has the violin been moved?" "Not an inch." Holmes walked slowly along the stage edge, his gaze sweeping the boards and rafters, the low-hanging curtains, the catwalk high above. "The violin is a message," he said at last. Denham blinked. "You mean the murder weapon?" "Number A symbol. Victor Lansing's entire identity was bound to that instrument. To destroy it at the moment of his death, there's meaning in that." From behind us came the sound of rapid footsteps. A young woman, pale and breathless, appeared at the threshold. She was striking, with raven-dark hair and trembling hands. Her cheeks were blotched with emotion, but her voice, when she spoke, held composure. "I'm sorry," she said. "They told me I could come. I'm Eleanor Vale. I was his student." Holmes gestured for her to sit. She did so, tightly clasping her gloves in her lap. "You studied under Mr. Lansing?" he asked. "Yes, for over a year. He was brilliant. But lately, He had grown paranoid. How so? He kept cancelling lessons. He said someone was following him, watching his flat. He even told me he'd been receiving threats. Did he show you any such notes? Number. He never trusted anyone quite that much. Holmes gave a slight nod, then turned back to Denham. You'll want to inspect his apartment. I imagine it's nearby. Bloomsbury. I've already posted a constable to secure it. Good. We shall go there next. But first, Miss Vale, did Mr. Lansing ever mention a man named Frederick Broom? Eleanor's face hardened. Only once. He told me never to trust him. Why? I don't know. I assumed it was professional rivalry. Broom used to write for the London Herald, but he was discredited for something. I'm not sure what. I think he and Victor had history. Holmes's expression darkened slightly. I believe it is time we had a word with Mr. Broom. Denham, do you know where he resides? I've the address. Clerkenwell. He's not been seen in weeks. Holmes turned on his heel. Then let us see if he's found tonight, or if our murderer has struck twice. Clerkenwell, when we arrived, was shrouded in a thin mist. The building in question was a tall, narrow block of rented flats, the brickwork weathered and pocked by soot. Mrs. Beatrice Dodd, the landlady, was a stout woman with a suspicious squint and a taste for exaggeration. "You're here about Mr. Broom, aren't you?" she said at once, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I told the constable something was wrong. 2 days now he hasn't stirred. No sounds, no letters, and a dreadful smell coming from his rooms. Holmes looked at Denham, who gave a terse nod. Together we ascended to the top floor and forced the door open. The room was cold, dark and suffocating. A single oil lamp burned low in the corner. Broom was slumped against the wall, a length of curtain cord tied neatly around his neck. His face was purplish and sunken. One hand rested in his lap, the other hung limp beside him. Twisted around his right forefinger was a thin length of violin string. Holmes did not speak for some time. "Is this suicide?" Denham asked grimly. Holmes bent to examine the cord, then shook his head. "Number, the knot is too neat, too deliberate. This was staged." He stood slowly, his eyes scanning the floor. "And that string, why leave it? Unless it too was part of the message." I moved toward the hearth, where a small tin box lay ajar. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, most bearing Lansing's name. "Obsession?" I murmured. "Or leverage?" Holmes remained silent. When we returned to the theatre later that night, Holmes took one final look into the orchestra pit and then made his way onto the stage. He stood still, facing the audience, as though trying to see the scene from the murderer's perspective. "I suspect," he said softly, "we are dealing not with vengeance, but with a composition. A man or woman who thinks in movements and motifs. These murders are not merely acts of violence, they are stanzas in a symphony." He turned to me, and for the first time since the case began, there was genuine concern in his voice. "And the final note, Watson, has not yet been played. Chapter 2. The apartment in G minor." We arrived at Victor Lansing's Bloomsbury apartment shortly after 9 the following morning. The rain from the previous night had lifted, leaving the London streets glistening and washed, as though the city itself had paused for breath after a storm. Holmes walked briskly ahead of me, his coat flaring behind him like a cape, eyes scanning everything and nothing, his mind undoubtedly already assembling a shape from the disparate notes of the case. The building was an elegant 5-story block reserved for professionals and performers. A brass plaque bearing Lansing's name gleamed beside the second-floor bell. The constable on duty unlocked the door without ceremony, revealing a narrow corridor lined with framed concert posters and a faint, lingering scent of pipe tobacco and citrus polish. Inside, the flat was more lived in than I expected. Far from the austere perfection of some artists' studios, Lansing's space felt deeply personal. Sheet music littered a walnut writing desk. A velvet dressing gown lay tossed over the back of a chair. 2 violins, one of them clearly antique, rested in cushioned cradles, untouched. Holmes moved through the apartment like a breeze, touching little but observing everything. He paused near the fireplace, where a row of photographs stood. One featured Victor and his sister Cora in formal dress. Another, more recent, showed him with Eleanor Vale. Holmes picked it up, examining it with narrowed eyes. "Note her expression," he said, showing me the photograph. "Detached, almost as though she were posing beside a stranger." "She did seem oddly composed last night," I admitted. Holmes returned the photograph, then opened a drawer in the writing desk. Inside were several torn envelopes, a bottle of ink, a stack of loose manuscripts, and a small silver whistle. He held it up. "Do you know what this is, Watson?" "A dog whistle, surely?" "Precisely. Though I find no trace of a dog in this flat, nor of any pet food, leash, or bedding." I stepped to the window, noting how it faced a modest courtyard garden below. "Perhaps he used it for protection to startle intruders." "Perhaps," Holmes said, turning it over in his palm. "But I wonder." He placed the whistle on the desk and moved toward the bedchamber. I followed. The bedroom was neat, the bed tightly made. On the nightstand was a small black notebook. Holmes flipped it open and read silently. After a moment, he handed it to me. Inside were fragmented entries. Some were written in haste, others scratched out entirely. One page read, "He's watching again, always in the 3rd row, sometimes in the alley, always whistling. I don't sleep anymore." Another simply stated, "Eleanor. Lies or something else." And then, "Whistler came again last night, but no sound, just the cold, just the silence." Holmes was quiet for a long time. "He believed someone was stalking him," I said at last. "Yes," Holmes murmured, "and note the mention of a whistle or a whistler. I believe it connects to Mr. Broom's murder. The violin string around his finger, it's symbolic. And now, this whistle placed neatly among correspondence. You believe the killer left it? I believe the killer left it knowing we would find it." Before I could speak further, a knock sounded at the door. Inspector Denham stepped in, holding a telegram. "It's from the coroner," he said. "Lansing died from cardiac arrest. No sign of poison, no contusions, nothing to suggest foul play." "Nothing physical, perhaps," Holmes said, still staring out the window. "But murder can take many forms: fear, suggestion, even sound." Denham frowned. "You think he was frightened to death?" "I think someone found a way to silence him without laying a hand on him." Denham handed Holmes another paper. "Also, I found this among Broom's effects. It's a partial article draft, never published." We both read it in silence. "Victor Lansing, The Broken Harmony." For all his acclaim, whispers follow the virtuoso talk of vanished students, debts covered in silence, and a patron who disappeared without trace. The music world may adore his touch, but behind it lies a note of dissonance yet to be struck. Holmes folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his coat. "Watson," he said softly, "how does one disappear without trace, unless the trace itself is buried under applause?" That afternoon, we returned to Reed's Theatre, where Holmes requested to inspect the backstage area alone. I remained in the stalls, seated beside Eleanor Vale, who had agreed to meet us again. Her expression was guarded but not unfriendly. "You were close to Victor?" I asked gently. She nodded. As close as one could be, I suppose. He admired excellence and detested mediocrity. When you pleased him, he made you feel as if the world held its breath for your music. But when you failed, she trailed off. He was cruel? Not overtly, but cold, calculated. He knew how to break you without ever raising his voice. And did you love him? She looked at me, startled. Number though, I think he believed I did, or wanted me to. At that moment, Holmes reappeared, his coat dusted with cobwebs and his eyes sharp with insight. "There's a passage," he said. "Concealed beneath the stage, likely an old access tunnel from when the theatre doubled as a meeting hall decades ago. It leads to the alley outside, enough for someone to slip in unseen." "Then it could not have been a locked room death after all," I said. "No, Watson, only the illusion of one." Holmes turned to Eleanor. "Miss Vale, what do you know of a woman named Annette Grevin?" She blinked. "That name, I know it. She was Victor's first prodigy, years before me. French, brilliant, and then gone. Victor said she left the country. There were rumors." "Rumors of scandal?" Holmes asked. She looked away. "Something like that, but no one knew for certain." Holmes nodded once. "Then our next step is to find someone who does." Later that evening, as Holmes lit a lamp in our Baker Street sitting room, he turned to me. "Two murders, Watson, both without clear cause. One silenced by suggestion, the other staged with a performance's precision. The question is no longer how, but why. What link binds Broome, Lansing, and a woman named Annette Grevin?" I offered no answer, and Holmes did not expect one. He paced, slowly and rhythmically, as though conducting an orchestra only he could hear. When he spoke again, it was not to me, but more to himself. "There is a note being played in all this," he murmured. "We just haven't heard it properly yet." Chapter 3. The Woman Who Vanished Twice. There are names that echo faintly in the dusty halls of history, half remembered, whispered in corners, and then lost. Such was the name Annette Grevin until Holmes spoke it into the stillness of our sitting room that night. He stood before the fire, not for warmth, but as a habit of thought, hands behind his back, eyes half closed in rumination. "Watson," he said finally, "our next move depends on a woman who, by all accounts, ceased to exist nearly 4 years ago." "You think Annette Grevin is alive?" "I think she must be, unless we have been following a ghost through a corridor of corpses." That morning, we departed Baker Street and made for the Royal Conservatory in Kensington, where Annette Grevin had once been a promising student. It was an austere institution, all straight lines and stone archways, run with the precision of a military academy. Holmes, with his unassuming air of bureaucracy, obtained access to the student records with surprising ease. He flipped through the brittle folios with practiced efficiency until he stopped at one. Here she is, Annette Elise Grevin, French national, enrolled 1886, graduated 1890 with top marks in violin performance, accepted a private tutelage under Victor Lansing later that year, left suddenly in late 1891, no forwarding address. Nothing more. Holmes turned the page. "Ah, a notation, withdrawn under unusual circumstances, recommendation sealed by director's order. Curious." He tapped the sheet thoughtfully. "There's more here than discretion. There's suppression." Before I could inquire further, the conservatory's clerk returned with a stiff smile. "We did have someone inquire about Miss Grevin some months ago." Holmes perked up. "Oh? Who?" "Didn't leave a name. Middle-aged gentleman, had a limp and wore a hat, far too wide for the season." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, then said quietly, "Thank you. That will do." Outside, the clouds had thickened again. Holmes stood beneath the portico in silence for a moment, then spoke lowly. "There's something about this case that unsettles me, Watson. We are not merely tracing a crime. We are uncovering a composition, a design, where each movement builds toward a crescendo. The problem is, I do not yet know what is being performed. Our next lead came not through documentation, but by feet and patience. Holmes led us southward to a row of boarding houses near Lambeth. He had reasoned correctly that if Annette had changed her identity, she would not stray far from the world she knew. We visited 3 homes in as many hours, Holmes playing the part of a gentle-eyed solicitor or health inspector, depending on what earned entry. Finally, at a crooked brick house with peeling green shutters, we found a match. The landlady, a thin woman with sharper eyes than her frame suggested, nodded when Holmes inquired after a Miss Anna Grayson. "Top floor, music teacher, strange sort, but quiet." With a polite thank you and a coin pressed into her palm, we made our way upstairs. The top flat was narrow with a warped door and a flickering lamp just beyond the threshold. Holmes knocked, no reply. He knocked again, firmer. At last the door creaked open an inch. A pale eye appeared in the gap. "Yes?" "Miss Grayson?" Holmes said gently. "Or should I say Miss Grevin?" A pause. "I think you have mistaken me. I am Sherlock Holmes. This is Dr. Watson. We are investigating the deaths of Victor Lansing and Frederick Broom." The door opened further. The woman behind it was in her 30s, her features sharp but worn, like a marble statue weathered by too many winters. Her auburn hair was streaked with grey, her eyes large and haunted. She let us in wordlessly. The room was sparse, a violin case on the table, a threadbare rug, a kettle on a single gas ring. The kind of life built in pieces, not permanence. "You said Victor is dead?" she asked, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. Holmes nodded. "Found in the orchestra pit at Reed's Theatre. No cause of death, no sign of struggle. Broom followed the next night. Hanged." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "I told Broom not to print it. I begged him." Holmes's voice was very quiet. "Print what, Miss Grevin?" She swallowed. "Victor ruined me. I was his star pupil. But he wanted more than obedience. When I resisted, he told the director I was unstable. He said I threatened him with violence. They expelled me. I lost my scholarships. My family believed him. I had nothing. You changed your name. I had no choice, and Broom found me years later. He was investigating Lansing, said he wanted justice, for me and others. But he wanted something else too. He wanted to be famous again. "Did he threaten to expose you?" She nodded. "He had the original letters I wrote to the director. He said if I didn't help him, he'd release them with my name. So I told him what he wanted, about Victor, about the rumours, about the girl who disappeared before me." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Girl?" She hesitated. "Nina Langley, young, quiet. She studied with Victor privately. One day, she vanished. Victor said she left for Germany, but her belongings were still at the conservatory. Broom said she was pregnant, said Victor had silenced her. Watson and I exchanged a glance. "Do you know if Eleanor Vale knew about this?" I asked. Annette looked at me sharply. "Eleanor, of course she did. She confronted Victor last year. She threatened to go public, but he laughed at her, said she'd never play again if she defied him." "And so," Holmes said softly, "we have 3 women. One destroyed, one vanished, and one silenced by shame." She looked up. "Do you think I killed him?" "I think you have motive, but so does someone else. Someone who is orchestrating these deaths with precision and message. Did you hear anything strange the night Victor died?" Annette paused. "Yes, I couldn't sleep. I opened my window. The wind was howling, but I heard it again. Heard what? She looked away. The whistle. Back at Baker Street, the rain was falling again, this time harder, more persistently. Holmes sat in his armchair, eyes closed, violin in hand, but he did not play. He held it loosely, as though weighing it. The whistle, he murmured. You believe it's a signal? I believe it's the key. Oral manipulation, fear, conditioning, some element of control or threat delivered through sound. And it terrified Lansing? Holmes opened his eyes. It destroyed him. The whistler was real to him, just as it was to Annette, just as it may be to Eleanor. He turned toward the fire, the glow catching the sharp lines of his face. One woman vanished, one was ruined, one is still in danger. And unless I am mistaken, Watson, the crescendo has not yet come. Chapter 4. The crescendo in the alley. The next day broke grey and breathless. London wore its silence like a scarf tucked too tightly round the throat. At breakfast, Holmes scarcely touched his tea. Instead, he paced in short bursts, speaking now and then in murmured phrases to himself. Single notes in a score I could not yet hear. He paused finally, turning to me with that unmistakable gleam of clarity in his eyes. Watson, this is no longer a case of scattered motives. It is a composition, each death, each message, a movement in a larger piece. It's time we listen for the conductor. We returned to Reed's Theatre just past 11. The stage hands were gone, the floorboards still creaking with the memory of performance. Inspector Denham met us by the alley entrance, a cigarette half-burned between his fingers. You're just in time, he said. A vagrant was found unconscious behind the theatre early this morning. He's raving, claims he saw someone near the fire escape last night. Where is he now? Holmes asked. Still behind the theatre, refuses to come inside, won't speak to anyone but the man in the tall coat, which I assume is you. Holmes gave a faint smile. Let us not keep him waiting. The alley behind Reed's Theatre was narrow and grimy, flanked by soot-darkened walls and the sour stench of rain-soaked refuse. Slumped against a crate was a man who could have been any age between 30 and 60. His beard was wild, his coat a patchwork of survival. Yet his eyes, bloodshot though they were, held the sharpness of one who sees more than he speaks. Holmes approached him slowly. I'm Sherlock Holmes. You asked for me? The man nodded slowly. They call me Finch. Leastways they used to. I saw the ghost, sir. I heard it too. Holmes crouched beside him. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Finch's eyes darted between us, then settled. I sleeps back here most nights, tucked up by them old crates. Quiet place mostly. But last night, just past 2, there was a whistle. Not no copper's whistle, mind. It was soft, long, lonely, like something calling across a graveyard. What direction did it come from? Finch pointed up toward the fire escape. Third landing, near where the stage door opens. Then I saw her. Pale as mist she was, long black coat, moved like she floated. She didn't climb, just stood there looking down, then gone. Holmes frowned. Gone where? Nowhere, just vanished. I stepped forward. You're sure it was a woman? Finch nodded slowly. Felt like it, sir. There was a sadness about her, like she was waiting for someone who never came. Holmes rose to his feet. Thank you, Mr. Finch. You've been most helpful. He turned to Denham. Have someone take him to a shelter and ensure he receives food. As Denham passed instructions, Holmes walked toward the base of the fire escape. He studied the bolts, the ironwork, the shadows it cast. There are marks here, he murmured. Recent ones, and look, scratches on the ledge, just deep enough to suggest pressure, not weight. Someone perched here? I asked. Or something was placed here, a device, perhaps even a resonator. I blinked. You think the whistle is mechanical? Possibly. Or the device simply amplifies a naturally soft sound. The alley's acoustics would make it seem spectral. Imagine the effect on a mind already frayed. He stepped back. We must revisit Eleanor Vale. Eleanor received us that afternoon in a modest studio flat above a music shop in Fitzrovia. The walls were lined with manuscript paper and tuned strings, and in the corner stood her prized violin, gleaming dully in the light from the window. I don't know what more I can offer, she said after we entered. You said Annette believes I'm in danger? She believes you know more than you've said, Holmes replied. About Lansing, about Nina Langley. At that name, Eleanor's expression cracked. Nina, she whispered. She was the first friend I made when I moved to London. Quiet, yes, but joyful in her playing. Victor was charmed by her, too charmed. You saw this? Not directly, but I heard things, his temper, her tears. Then one day she missed a lesson, then another. She never returned. Did you speak to anyone about her disappearance? Eleanor hesitated. I tried. The director told me she'd withdrawn for personal reasons. Victor claimed she'd eloped. I didn't believe either. Holmes's tone was still gentle. And yet you continued to study with him. I was young, ambitious. I told myself I could survive it, that I was different. She turned away. But I wasn't. Silence fell. Finally, Holmes said, You mentioned you heard a whistle once. Can you describe it? Eleanor looked at him sharply. It was faint, chilling. I heard it outside my flat weeks ago. I thought I was imagining it. But then I began dreaming of it. Sometimes I'd wake with it still ringing in my ears. Did you ever see anyone near your building? She shook her head. No one. Just the sound. Holmes nodded. Miss Vale, I believe someone is orchestrating fear like a maestro. Lansing, Broom, and possibly Nina were victims. You may be the next intended movement. Eleanor grew pale. Do you think I'm in danger? I think the killer leaves no threads untied. That evening, back at Baker Street, Holmes placed a small tuning fork on the table and struck it gently. The note hung in the air, sharp, thin, and strangely invasive. Sound can unsettle more than sight, he said. Now imagine a whistle, precisely tuned to trigger dread, echoing through alleys and over rooftops. And used, I said, as a weapon. Holmes nodded. We're looking for someone who understands music intimately, perhaps better than any of the victims. Someone who envied Lansing, or feared him, or both. He paused. Watson, I want you to visit the pawn shops near Reed's Theatre tomorrow. Ask if anyone recently sold or purchased a high-frequency whistle or tuning device. I'll return to the theatre alone. There's something in the acoustics I've overlooked. Before I could respond, there came a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Denham, whose expression was grave. There's been another development, he said. Henry Vale, Eleanor's father, was attacked in his home. He's alive but unconscious. No sign of forced entry. His violin, the one he used to teach Eleanor, was smashed. Holmes stood slowly. Another message. Denham frowned. From who? Holmes's voice was cold. From someone determined to silence every voice that once knew Victor Lansing's secrets. Chapter 5. The conductor's signature. The news of Henry Vale's attack cast a long shadow over the morning. Holmes and I took an early train to Kensington Hospital, where Mr. Vale had been taken following the assault. The chill of the previous days lingered, and inside the ward, a heavy hush cloaked the room. It was a silence interrupted only by the soft ticking of a clock and the distant rattle of tea carts down tiled corridors. Holmes approached the bed without a word. Mr. Vale lay unconscious, his greying hair dishevelled, the left side of his face marked with a dark bruise. A nurse hovered nearby, adjusting the blankets. "Has he said anything?" Holmes asked. The nurse shook her head. "He hasn't stirred once. They found him beside his broken wheelchair, violin destroyed next to him." Holmes's gaze sharpened. Was the violin smashed deliberately or by accident? They said it looked deliberate. Clean break across the bridge, strings torn, body splintered, the case was closed and placed beside him as if to mock. "Indeed," Holmes murmured. As we stepped into the corridor, he added quietly, "It's not just a warning, it's a signature, a message written in splinters and strings." "You believe this is the same person who killed Lansing and Broom?" "Yes, but it's more personal now. Henry Vale was no threat. His career ended years ago. But he was a violinist, a mentor, a father, a thread in the same fabric." "And Eleanor?" I asked. "She's not merely a target. She's the crescendo." We returned to Baker Street shortly before noon. Holmes declined tea, instead pacing with sudden intensity. "Watson, what do we know?" I listed it aloud. "Victor Lansing, dead in the theatre. Cause? Unknown, but possibly psychological shock. Frederick Broom, hanged, a violin string around his finger. Annette, Grevin, discredited, hidden. Nina Langley, vanished. Henry Vale, attacked. And a recurring motif, sound, the whistle." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. We are chasing a mind that communicates through music and silence, someone who composes with fear." A knock interrupted us. It was a boy from a nearby shop, bearing a note addressed to Holmes. He opened it carefully, reading aloud. "Your deductions are flat, Mr. Holmes. The tempo is changing. Listen closely, or the final note will ring without your applause." "The conductor." Holmes handed me the paper. It was signed not with a name, but a sketched treble clef. Beneath it, someone had drawn a single quaver, a musical note, a chilling flourish. "Now we are being challenged," Holmes said. "He wants us to follow the rhythm he sets." "And who is he?" Holmes's lips tightened. "A student, perhaps, or someone who once was. Someone close enough to Victor's circle to know its darkest corners." "Someone like Eleanor?" He gave me a sharp look. "Perhaps. Or someone she's shielding." That afternoon, we followed our lead from the pawn shops. Holmes had dispatched a message ahead, and we were met at a small shop on Berwick Street by a man named Mullen, a pawnbroker with a glass eye and hands permanently stained with tobacco. "Right strange business last week," Mullen said, as he showed us into a back room. "Fella brought in an odd whistle. Said it was an antique dog whistle, silver and bone, but it weren't. No markings, and pitched high, so high I could barely hear it." Holmes examined the whistle, which lay in a velvet-lined box. "And did he give a name?" Mullen shook his head. "Didn't ask. Tall, thin, gloves on, kept his hat down low." "Did he sell anything else?" "A metronome, old, expensive-looking, German make, and this." He opened another drawer and pulled out a folded sheet of manuscript paper. Musical notation, handwritten in a careful, confident hand. Holmes read it silently. "This is a funeral motif," he said. "Subtle variations in tempo, a false cadence here. Deliberately unsettling. Would you recognize the composer?" Holmes studied the signature at the bottom. "It's not signed traditionally, just an emblem." It was the same treble clef with the quaver. "The conductor again," I said, "or so he wants us to believe." Holmes insisted we return to Reed's Theatre that evening. He believed the killer would strike again, and perhaps even desired an audience. We arrived just as twilight sank into the city, carrying with us the manuscript and whistle, carefully wrapped. Inside, Holmes instructed Denham to post men at each entrance. No interruptions, no movements unless I signal. "What do you expect to happen?" the inspector asked. "A performance," Holmes replied grimly. "And we must not miss a single note." We waited in the wings of the stage. The theatre was empty, save for shadows and silence. Then, sometime after 10, a sound emerged. A whistle. High, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. Holmes turned sharply. "There." He moved toward the orchestra pit where the sound echoed faintly. I followed, every hair on my neck standing. It was as if the theatre itself were breathing. Then, footsteps above, light, hurried, and moving along the catwalk. Denham's men moved to intercept, but Holmes raised his hand. "Number, let them come." We watched as a figure emerged from the back of the theatre, hooded, slim. They stepped onto the stage slowly, holding something in their hands, a baton. The figure raised the baton, and then a single note echoed across the theatre. Not from an instrument, but from the rafters. A preset device triggered by motion or signal, a piercing whistle that shook the air. Holmes moved quickly. "Now." The lights snapped on. Denham's men converged. The figure dropped the baton and tried to flee, but was caught before the curtains. As the hood was pulled away, I gasped. It was Cora Lansing. In the dressing room where she was detained, she said little at first. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes burned with cold fire. "I never meant for Eleanor to die," she said finally, "just to be afraid, just like I was." Holmes leaned forward. "You planted the whistle, staged the sound to torment them. They deserved it. And Victor?" "I watched him die," she said, "not by my hand, but by his own terror. I played the note, the one he used to teach me, over and over, until it haunted me. I played it back to him, loud, over and over, until he couldn't breathe." "And Broom?" "He tried to blackmail me. Said he knew about Nina, about what Victor had done. I warned him. He wouldn't listen." "And Henry Vale?" "He recognized the melody. He started asking questions. I silenced him too." Holmes was quiet. Then he said almost gently, "And the name? The conductor?" Cora looked down. That was what Victor used to call himself. In our lessons, in our punishments, he'd say, "You don't lead the orchestra, Cora. I do." So I gave the name back to him. And then I destroyed it. Chapter 6. A melody left behind. The next morning dawned with a curious clarity, the London skyline rinsed clean by rain and framed in pale gold. Yet the atmosphere in Baker Street was far from calm. Holmes sat with his violin under his chin, drawing the bow slowly across the strings, not to play, but to think. The soft, dissonant sounds drifted through our flat like ghosts reluctant to leave. Cora Lansing's confession had brought a measure of closure. Victor Lansing, the brilliant but cruel musician, had been undone by his own past, orchestrated into terror by the very woman he once silenced. Broom, the blackmailing journalist, had paid the price for his meddling. And Henry Vale, still unconscious, had, in his daughter's eyes, wandered too close to the truth. And yet Holmes was unsatisfied. "There is a flaw, Watson," he said suddenly, stopping the bow, mid-glide. "Something in her story does not resolve." "You think she lied?" "Not entirely, but she left something out, intentionally." He set the violin down and walked to the window. Cora planned the theatre scene meticulously. She planted the whistle, used the rafters for acoustics, and triggered Victor's deepest fears. But she never mentioned one thing: the musical manuscript found at the pawn shop, the funeral motif signed by the conductor. She could not have composed it. That handwriting, too bold, too practiced, it wasn't hers. And someone else helped her? Or someone else entirely was pulling the strings? We returned to Scotland Yard that afternoon to speak with Cora again, this time in a quieter, less charged setting. She sat in a plain interrogation room, hands folded, her eyes no longer burning with vengeance, but dulled with defeat. Holmes seated himself across from her. "There's something you haven't told us," he began. "About the manuscript." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I told you I didn't write it. I found it in Victor's flat months ago. I thought it was one of his compositions." "Did he ever play it?" "Number Wayne tried once on his piano, but he stopped me. He looked afraid." Holmes leaned forward. "And the signature, the conductor, wasn't his?" Cora frowned. "Number." "He said it was a joke, that someone used to send him those scores anonymously. He kept them locked away." "Do you still have them?" "I burned the rest. I only sold that one for money." Holmes leaned back, fingers steepled. "Then we are dealing with a composer who preceded you. Someone who haunted Lansing before you even planned your revenge." I stepped in. "Perhaps the same person who sent us that message. Your deductions are flat?" Cora's head snapped up. "You received that too?" Holmes watched her carefully. "So did Victor." "That's what terrified him more than anything. Not your whistle, not the theatre, but the idea that someone else was listening. That evening, Holmes made a rare request for silence. He paced our rooms until the gas lamps flickered, then suddenly reached for his violin once more. But this time he played. A single melody, slow and mournful, filled the flat. It was not one I recognized. The tune faltered near the end, slipping into an unfinished cadence. Holmes stopped abruptly. "It's the funeral motif," he said. I blinked. "You've memorized it?" "Nearly, but the final bar is missing, or intentionally obscured. It leaves a question, like a sentence, missing its last word." He crossed to the desk and unfurled the manuscript again. "There, see this rest and the double bar? It's been rewritten, scratched out and inked anew. Why? To change the meaning of the music? Or to hide a clue?" He struck a match and held the paper near the flame. A faint shimmer of faded ink became visible, barely perceptible beneath the overwritten final notes. Holmes read aloud. "Langley." "E minor." "Whisper 12 inches. Nina Langley," I said at once. Holmes nodded. "And E minor, the key of sorrow. Whisper 12, possibly a title or a location." He pulled a battered map of London from the shelf and laid it across the table. "There's a narrow mews off Drury Lane called Whistler's Row. Number 12 was once a boarding school for girls, closed 5 years ago. And Nina Langley vanished just over 5 years ago." Holmes nodded again. "It's time we heard what happened to her. By nightfall we reached Whistler's Row. The buildings here leaned together like old gossips, their windows blind with dust. Number 12 was dark, the lower windows boarded, but the lock on the front door had been recently disturbed. Holmes picked it easily. Inside, the air was stale. The smell of rotting wood and paper filled our lungs. Dust coated every surface, yet there were fresh footprints leading down the corridor. 2 sets. We followed them cautiously through a narrow hallway and into a back parlour. There, to our astonishment, sat a grand piano, its keys still intact. Holmes moved forward slowly. On the music stand was a page of handwritten notes. The same handwriting as the funeral motif. He read silently. "Then this is it, Watson. The original composition, Whisper, 12 inches. A rustle sounded from upstairs. We drew our revolvers and moved up the creaking staircase. At the end of the landing, a door hung slightly ajar. Inside sat a woman in her late 30s, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She did not startle as we entered. "You're Nina Langley," Holmes said. She nodded. "We believed you dead." "I was," she replied softly. "To everyone else." We lowered our weapons. "You wrote the scores?" I asked. "Yes, I sent them to Victor. Anonymous. I wanted him to feel watched, to know I remembered. Holmes stepped closer. You knew what he did to Cora, to Annette. You were first. I was foolish. I trusted him. When I told him I was with child, he arranged for me to be sent away, said it would ruin his career, but then he struck me. I fell. I lost everything. She closed her eyes. But I lived and I vanished. Holmes nodded slowly. And the music? It was the only language he understood. I sent him a bar at a time, every month, a slow, haunting reminder. Did you kill him? Number Y only scared him. He did the rest. And Brew? I never saw him. Only Cora. She found me. She wanted justice. I gave her my music. Holmes exhaled. You composed the fear. She orchestrated the performance. Nina looked down. And now? Holmes was quiet for a moment. Then, now the conductor has laid down the baton. Chapter 7. The Final Movement. For all its violence and drama, the case had taken place in a world of stillness, concert halls long emptied, scores written but never played aloud, whispers exchanged behind locked doors. But as we left number 12, Whistler's Row, that illusion crumbled. Holmes and I had stumbled not just into a string of crimes, but into the final bars of a symphony that had begun years earlier. That night in Baker Street, Holmes lit no fire. Instead, he stood before the window, staring out across the slick rooftops as if listening for some distant chord only he could hear. She didn't kill him, I said finally. Nina Langley, I mean. Holmes didn't move. But she conducted the arrangement, just as Cora performed it. And yet someone else edited the last note. He turned. Exactly. Crossing the room, he placed two pieces of manuscript paper side by side. Nina's original composition retrieved from the piano at Whistler's Row, and the one sold to the pawn shop. Compare them, Watson. I leaned over the table. The final bar, they differ. Indeed, Nina's version ends in a resolved cadence, E minor to C major. Mournful but complete. But the pawnshop copy was altered. The cadence remains hanging, discordant. It breaks the listener's expectation, creates tension, not closure. So someone changed the music after Nina composed it. And it's this altered version that drove Lansing to panic. Holmes tapped the treble clef. Someone else wanted Victor Lansing not just afraid, but undone. And that someone is still out there. The following day, we returned to Scotland Yard. Cora Lansing remained in custody, but Holmes requested she be brought in for one final discussion, this time with Nina Langley present. The reunion was painful to watch. Cora flinched when she saw Nina. Nina could barely meet her eyes. I didn't know, Cora whispered, about the baby, about what he did to you. Nina's voice was steady but flat. It doesn't matter. What's done is done. Holmes, seated between them, intervened. I called you both here because I believe the truth still has a note yet to sound. Nina, the manuscript you gave Cora, the one titled Whisper 12, it was edited. Your final bar was changed. Do you know who might have had access to it? Nina looked genuinely puzzled. Only Cora. I never touched it, Cora said instantly. I barely understood what half of it meant. Someone did, Holmes said. And it was someone who knew exactly how to weaponize sound. He stood and turned to Denham. Has Henry Vale regained consciousness? Briefly, the inspector replied. The doctors said he muttered something. Holmes raised a brow. What was it? No accident? That's all. By mid-afternoon we were standing once again at the bedside of Henry Vale. His features had relaxed, but the bruising remained, and his speech was laboured. Holmes leaned close. Mr. Vale, I must ask you a difficult question. Think carefully. Was your attack related to Victor Lansing? The old man opened one eye. Yes, he rasped. Did you know something about his past? Another nod. Who attacked you? Vale's lips trembled. Then, my daughter. My breath caught. Eleanor. Holmes was already on his feet. We found her in her flat above the music shop, just where we had last seen her. She opened the door calmly, her face betraying nothing. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I wasn't expecting you. Holmes stepped inside without waiting. Miss Vale, your father is awake. He told us who attacked him. She blinked, one hand tightening on the doorframe. And? He said it was you. Silence. I watched her eyes, but there was no fear, only fatigue. He remembered that? Yes, Holmes said, and I believe he remembered much more. She closed the door softly behind us. You're right. He did. Eleanor Vale did not confess in tears. She spoke with a tired grace, as though describing something that had already happened long ago. I never meant to kill Victor, she said, but I wanted him to feel the fear he gave so many others. You altered the manuscript, Holmes said. She nodded. I found it in Cora's flat. She had left it behind. I recognized Nina's handwriting. I played it, and I knew what it could do. And you changed it, I said. Just the ending. I added tension, an unresolved note, one that would cling to the mind like a splinter. Holmes's tone was cool. Why? Because Victor ruined us all. He shattered Nina, humiliated Annette, drove Cora to revenge, and my father, he knew. He knew what Lansing was and said nothing. His silence gave Victor cover. So you used the music to drive Victor over the edge? I said. I did, she replied. And when Broom came sniffing around, I gave him the edited score without telling him. Let him draw the line himself. And your father? Holmes asked. Eleanor looked down. He found the manuscript on my desk. He recognized the melody. He knew what I'd done. We argued. I pushed him. Not hard, but he fell. And the final whistle at the theatre? She smiled faintly. I timed it perfectly. I played it from the rafters. I knew exactly when the acoustics would carry. There was no remorse in her tone, only resolution. Later that evening, as the gaslights glowed against the damp streets of Baker Street, Holmes and I sat in silence. The case is closed, I said finally. Legally, yes, Holmes replied. But emotionally? These people were bound together by trauma, each one complicit in silence or action. Do you believe Eleanor is a murderer? Holmes was quiet. Not in the traditional sense. She crafted fear, not with hands, but with harmony. She composed a death. And justice? He considered this. Sometimes, he said, justice plays in a minor key. Chapter 8. Justice in a minor. 3 weeks passed. London moved on as it always does, its streets swallowing secrets, its people turning pages, never looking back for long. The rain returned with more insistence, blurring gaslight halos and filling gutters with reflections that disappeared as quickly as they came. But the case of Victor Lansing, the night whistles, and the tragic score known only as Whisper 12 did not leave Sherlock Holmes's thoughts so easily, nor mine. We sat in Baker Street one evening in mid-May, the hearth warm, though the room remained oddly chilled. I cannot quite decide, Holmes said, whether this case ended in justice or in silence. Perhaps both, I replied, setting down my pen. Eleanor Vale had not stood trial. Her confession, though complete, had not been recorded formally. Henry Vale, still recovering, refused to press charges, claiming memory loss. Holmes had presented the entire case to Inspector Denham, but made one firm request, that Eleanor be left alone. She killed no one directly, Holmes had argued. She frightened, yes. She composed a piece of psychological revenge. But she did not strike the blow, pull the cord, or press poison to a lip. She played on what already existed inside her victims, and they responded. Denham, reluctantly, had agreed. Cora Lansing remained in custody, facing charges for the death of Broom and the assault on Henry Vale. As for Nina Langley, she vanished once more, this time, perhaps, for good. I gave her the keys to my old flat in Southwark. Holmes admitted. She deserved that much. And what about Whisper 12? I asked now, staring at the original manuscript spread across the desk. Holmes turned his gaze to the fire. Let it be buried, he said. The melody has served its purpose. Let it never be heard again. 2 days later, Holmes received a package, unmarked, save for a treble clef symbol pressed into the sealing wax. Inside was a metronome. No note, no music. It's her, Holmes said. Eleanor. He turned the device in his hand. It ticked, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Set to 60 beats per minute, a heartbeat, a final gesture. She wants me to know it's over, he murmured. We visited Cora Lansing one last time at Holloway Prison. She wore her shame like a second skin, tight and unremovable. She did not speak as we entered, but when Holmes placed the original, unedited manuscript on the table, her eyes flooded. He did hear it then, she said at last. Nina's music. That was real. Victor heard it, Holmes confirmed. But it was the altered version that destroyed him. Eleanor's final note. Cora closed her eyes. I thought I was the one who ended it, but I was just the second violinist. The solo belonged to someone else. Holmes stood. You still have a choice, Miss Lansing. You may face the music or let it play you. I suggest you take the first path. On a quiet Thursday morning, I found Holmes at the piano in our sitting room. He was playing a melody I didn't immediately recognize. Slow, elegant, wistful. Not Whisper 12, I hope, I said. He shook his head. Mozart, Piano Sonata, number 16 in C major. After a dark composition, one must cleanse the air. He struck the final chord with unusual softness, then turned to me. Watson, do you recall what Finch, the vagrant behind the theatre, said about the ghost on the fire escape? I nodded. He said it looked like a woman, standing, watching, then vanishing. Yes, but he never actually said he saw her climb or descend, nor did he see her leave. You think he imagined it? Number, I think. She wanted to be seen. She was performing. Eleanor? Undoubtedly, the entire case was a score, each person a player, each crime a movement, and she was the composer of the finale. I considered that for a moment. She didn't want revenge in the way Cora did, I said. She wanted resonance. Exactly, Holmes replied, to take the chaos of her past and orchestrate it into something that lingered. A final piece, written not in ink, but in fear, memory, and silence. He paused, and in that silence, perhaps, she found her own kind of peace. Weeks turned into months. We took on new cases, some ordinary, some not, but every now and then Holmes would sit at the piano, strike a few notes, and then stop, as though searching for a melody he no longer wished to find. Once I asked him if he'd kept the altered Whisper 12, the version with the discordant ending. No, he said simply. Some compositions must never be repeated. The summer brought warmth back to the city. But there were moments, on damp evenings or in the hollow quiet of concert halls, when I swore I could hear it again. The night whistle, not loud, not even real, but echoing somewhere deep, like the final breath of a symphony no one applauded, but no one forgot.